Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the STP training webinar, Continuous Integration and How It Affects Testing. Our speaker for the day is Paul Merrill, and I'm Smita Mishra, a professional tester myself, and I'm excited to host you all and Paul on our STP trainings. Incidentally, he has also been a speaker with us at our past STPCon conferences. So how was your experience, Paul, for the past few STPCons that you have attended?
Oh, it's always been good. Thanks for having me today. I've always enjoyed it. I've learned a ton and met some really great people.
Very nice. So anything specific that you liked?
I like the fact that most of the speakers are very approachable and that they're ready to talk with you and learn with you and think through your concerns within your testing environments with you.
Yep. So for all our listeners today, let me tell you, we have our next conference coming up, Fall 2017 STPCon. That is to be held in Washington, D.C. area from September 25th through 29th this year. So as you can see on the screen, we have various courses and certifications throughout these, throughout these dates. There are workshops through September 26th and 27th, and then there are conferences and sessions like through September 28th and 29th. The conference topics this time include automation, agile, performance, DevOps, mobile, security, leadership, strategy, and so much more. We typically have over 20 workshops and over 40 sessions for you to choose from, and the formats are like roundtables, case studies, hands-on exercises, tool demos, and so many of them for you to choose from. So the complete program is published for you to explore at stpcon.com. And if you register by 26th of August, which is like about 15 days away only now, you get to save about $400 off your registration. Paul, did you get a chance to look at the conference program and any selection so far on what sessions and workshops you are looking forward to?
I did. You know, I've been before and I've seen some of these folks speak before, and so I know who I like to listen to, but I'm always looking for new folks as well. One thing that I'm really excited about is I always love Mark Tomlinson's workshop, The Infuriatingly Fun Performance Puzzlers. So I'm looking forward to that. Curtis Struenberg has a workshop that I'm interested in for accelerating your agile testing. Now that's something that I do all the time, but I want to know about Curtis's approach to it. Angie Jones has a good session that's going to be on which tests should we automate. And I know how I think about what to automate, but I want to know how she thinks about it. And then in defense of simple tools, Jason Huggins is the developer, the creator of Selenium originally. He's also the creator of a couple other companies, Sauce Labs he founded. And I can't wait to see Jason speak at the last keynote there.
That's an awesome lineup, absolutely. And I will be surprised if anyone says, like I asked this question to quite a few speakers and everybody is like, definitely has Mark Tomlinson's puzzles thing on his list almost always. So I'm sure everybody's looking forward to it. I also saw that you have a session and a very popular workshop too. That's like, I don't want to open up much details about it for the audience, but can you please share some backdrop as to what you are speaking on?
Yeah, so Angie Jones and I will be doing this workshop on the evening of the 27th. So I believe that's one of the second day of the workshops, I believe. And we've done this before, had a lot of positive response, but basically the idea of dominoes, I didn't get a chance to play with them as much as I wanted when I was a kid, I guess. So now I'm giving other people the opportunity that I didn't have, which is to knock these dominoes down and set them up in neat, unique ways and to learn about test automation as we're doing it. So we always get a good response from it, learn a lot, and I learn a lot from those who attend. Also, I've got a session which is storytelling, telling the magical first steps of automated testing. And this is basically for those folks who need an introduction to automated testing or have gone through a successful or unsuccessful instance of trying to get test automation running. And these are some of the stories that I've learned along the way and tales that I like to share with folks. So that should be fun as well.
This is so cool. I'm sure people are looking forward to it again. It was there last time too and super popular. As a tester myself, I have found conferring to be one of the best ways to learn and also to get to know reputed testers across the globe, just like Paul said earlier, that this is the best place to actually build networks and connections, and I hope you all find it to be the same way. So, and guys, if you are on Twitter, please share the conference information and about this webinar with your followers and connections. We love the shout outs, so if you hear something that you like during the webinar, please tweet about it, and you can copy us at SoftwareTestPro. We'll be happy to retweet you. Another quick piece of information that I have for you is that there is an upcoming webinar, Enhanced Customer Experience by Proactive Performance Testing. This is to be done by Arun Datta on 23rd of August. Arun has worked on performance testing across the globe, across varied domains. I'm sure you'll find his talk very useful. The link is up for you to review and register, so go for it. All right, let's get started with the webinar today. Very warm welcome, Paul. We are very thrilled to have you with us today. Let me quickly introduce you for all of us here. So Paul Merrill is a principal software engineer in test and founder of Beaufort, Fairmont automated testing services. Paul works with his clients across the US, providing them consulting services, trainings, and doing projects to accelerate testing, reduce risk, and to increase the efficacy of testing processes. His goal is to make a positive impact in the world through test automation. And I also found an interesting question in his bio, which I shall read for the audience. It says, "You are agile, but is your testing agile?" So that's a thought to think about, friends. As an entrepreneur, tester, and software engineer, Paul has a unique perspective on launching and maintaining quality products. He also does monthly webinars, which you can check on his company website, which is Beaufort.com/webinars. Let me spell it out for you. BEAUFORT.FAIRMONT.com. So /webinars. There's so much more I could talk about his vast experience and extensive leadership on automation and testing in general, but I'll let him do the rest of the talking. And right before we start, a few housekeeping points for the next 1 hour. All the attendees shall remain muted through the webinar. You can type in your questions and share them with us through your question box. We shall take them up after Paul is done with his presentation or as and when he asks for it. The webinar shall be recorded and posted on the Software Test Pro site for the attendees to go through later. Automation is a very misunderstood area of testing, but it is also a very lucrative one from job opportunities perspective. So guys, please ask as many questions you wish to get the clarity on the subject. All right, Paul, very warm welcome again, and the floor is all yours now.
Thank you. Thanks. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. Smita, can you see my first slide there?
I can now.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Let me
Yes.
get back into full screen mode. Back here. Great. Great. So thank you so much for having me, STPCon. Thanks for talking and sharing that bio. I need to shorten it up a little bit there, Smita. Thanks so much. Once again, I'm from Beaufort, Fairmont. We help people with test automation. Here's my Twitter handle, DPaulMerrill. So if you want to tweet during this, if you want to connect with me, that's a great way to do it. I love being on Twitter and talking testing and test automation. So today we're going to talk continuous integration and how it affects testers. So, and also more great content on my webinar site, which Smita mentioned. So I want to start out talking about what we're talking about with integration. What does this mean? And basically what we're getting at here is that the way that this used to work was that we had engineers or developers or programmers working on code for extended periods of time. They might work on code for a week or 2 weeks or 3 months or a year. And then at some point toward the end of a release cycle, they would check that code in and it would integrate with everyone else's code, or maybe not. Maybe there would be big problems. In fact, most of the time there were big problems. And what was the worst part about this is that when there were problems with integration, no one could tell how long it was going to take to fix the problems. And so that's what we want to talk about today, is continuous integration and how it solves this problem along with others. So we're going to go through 3 questions. Number 1, what is continuous integration? Number 2, how do we leverage continuous integration as testers? And then finally, are we impacted by continuous integration? So first, what is it? So what we want to do is we want to have a picture like this, where when people integrate their code, good working together and everything works well. And there's some terminology about how this works and some things that I want to go through, but one of the keys to this is making short, small changes and integrating them together. Another key is test automation and the ability to deploy, but we'll get into each of those factors as we go along. But what we would like is to be able to integrate code all along the way frequently in order to have a nice high-quality product at the end of our release cycle and when we deliver. This gentleman here is Martin Fowler. He's one of the original signatories of the Agile Manifesto. He's written quite a few books. He knows software engineering up and down and left and right, and he defines continuous integration this way. Continuous integration is a software development practice where members of a team integrate their work frequently. Usually each person integrates at least daily, leading to multiple integrations per day. Each integration is verified by an automated build, including tests, to detect integration errors as quickly as possible. So I'll give you just a second there to read that. If you ever want these slides, you can email me, paul@beaufortfairmont.com, and I'd be happy to send them to you. But the idea is that we're going to make small changes instead of big ones. We're going to, as developers, as test automation engineers, write a small piece of code, at most a day's worth of code in most cases. And we're going to check that into source code control, and we're going to make sure that it works with everybody else's code as often as possible. And by doing this, we push issues with quality upstream, we push them to the left, and we find them earlier, decreasing cost and getting code out more quickly. Some of the benefits are these. We get rapid feedback, which is key. Developers want fast feedback about the code that they've written. They want to know if it matches the intent by our stakeholders. They want to know if it does what they believe it should do. They want to know if there are any side effects to it, and they want to know that as quickly as possible. One of the reasons that feedback being quick is so important is that if you've ever written code, which I did, I was a software engineer for a lot of years, you want that feedback quickly, because when I go back and I look at my code that I wrote even a week ago, it appears to me like someone else wrote it. It looks like something completely different than mine, and I have to think very hard about what I was trying to do at that time, and that costs time. Context shifting between whatever I'm doing today and whatever I was doing a week ago costs time. It's difficult to do. It's difficult to drill back in there. So the faster I get feedback about what I'm working on now, the less I have to shift my mind over to what I was working on long before, and the quicker I'm able to make changes, the more likely it is that my changes are safe and valid. So we want to make safer changes. And this is also, continuous integration is fundamental to the idea of continuous delivery. And if you don't know what continuous delivery is, we're not going to get into it too much today. But we have to have continuous integration working in order for continuous delivery to be an option. Code is always deployable. We've got updated environments, and frequently we run automated tests. So these are some of the benefits of CI. Here are a few more. We can find and resolve defects earlier, eliminate inconsistencies in deployment process, have hardening of our test automation more quickly, and a visible state of the product. This is something as testers we want. So I kind of identify myself as both a software engineer and a tester, and I believe that this is absolutely key. What we're there to do as testers is to be able to talk about the state of a product to people who matter at the right time. So before I get into an example of this, maybe I should just take a quick break, and Smita, if you'll help me, if there are any questions that folks have with concepts that I've gone over. I know that sometimes it takes a few minutes to type these questions into the box here in your GoToWebinar console, but please type them and I'd be happy to answer them. And Smita, if you'll help relay those, that would be terrific.
Yes, Paul, at the moment I don't see the questions, but what I can do is the moment they start trickling in, I can just ping you so we can stop and take the questions.
Sure, sounds good.
For now, we could go ahead. Or if you want, we could just wait for 30 seconds for somebody to push in their question if they have any.
Give it a few more seconds here. That's fine. I know for myself, I have to think through it and type it, and it just takes a minute or two for those to show up. All right, so I'm going to have you stop me.
Carry on for now.
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, so how continuous integration works. So what I wanted to do was make a graphical display of how continuous integration works. And what I've done here is on the bottom left, we have these people behind their computer, types of people. On the right, we have another graphic at the bottom, which are these little happy robots. And those are my test automation scripts. Those are the scripts that are going to run to tell us if what the system does, what we believed it should do when we wrote those scripts. We have 4 boxes. This is kind of a logical display here, not a physical one, but we have a source code repository. And that's this box on the left, and that's your Git or Mercurial or Subversion or Bitbucket or GitLab, and it goes by a lot of different names. But that is your source code repository that your developers use, that your test automation engineers use. That's where your source code is. That's where you're going to grab source code from in order to build it. The continuous integration system is, you might know it as Jenkins or Bamboo or Circle CI, or I believe GitHub has a continuous integration system now. But it is the system that's going to build your code. So in other words, it's going to take the code, it's going to compile it, it's going to package it in a way that we can deploy. And then many times within CI, it's going to be able to deploy it out to a system. And in this case, the only system that I care about in talking about how testers are affected by CI is the system under test. So SUT stands for system under test here. So this is kind of how this works. So generally, you'll have a commit from developers to the source code repository. And when this commit happens, somehow we notify the CI system. So either the source code repository notifies the CI system, or the CI system has been polling the source code repository for changes. But whichever way it works, the CI system is notified that there have been changes, which is what this commit is. The CI system says, I've got it, I'm building, it builds the code, it builds up something to deploy, and it deploys it out to this system under test. Once that's happened, it says, okay, the deploy is finished, and I'm going to start testing this. So it starts running a group of tests, a test suite of some kind. And once those have all passed, our bots down there are happy, then the CI system says, okay, the test passed, and it notifies the people who made the commit or the stakeholders who need to know about this. Most of the time, those are your developers. They might be test automation engineers. They might be testers. It's not necessarily your stakeholders. They don't necessarily need to know about every single build. But the stakeholders at the individual contributor level, the folks who are actually working on the code day to day, those are the people who need to know about this and get a notification. So that's a quick, simple how it works. So some of the prereqs to how this works, some of the prereqs to continuous integration are things like a one-button build. And what that means is, we defined a build as being the compilation, the activities of compiling the code, of packaging the code, and getting it ready to deploy. And that needs to be able to happen very simply with one action by a human, or one action by a timer, or one action by a trigger. And that means that there are no humans involved. So it may be that it's one line on the command prompt that you type in, and once you type it, code is going to be built and it's going to be deployed. It may be a button on a screen somewhere. It may just be an API or a process that is kicked off by continuous integration, but no humans are involved. So for instance, if right now, in order to get new code out to your system under test, you have to do something like update the schema by hand, and a database administrator has to be involved in that, that is not a one-button build. A human being is involved there. In order for continuous integration to work, we have to have a one-button build. We want a process that is repeatable, that's repeatable consistently, and it's in code, it's persisted in code, so one button does it. We want to make sure that all the components for that build are in source code control, that our tests are independent, repeatable, reliable, and that we've got a commitment internally on our testing and development teams to keeping those tests green. In other words, when there is a problem, when the test cases find issues or find problems, we are going to stop everything and go in and fix the build. We've got a CI instance, we've got a system under test, and the idea of a private build can be very helpful. In other words, when you're first establishing CI or establishing test automation in CI, it can be very helpful to have a build that not everyone sees. So before I get into practices, Smita, did we have any questions before? I'll take a break here to see if anybody's got questions and then kind of move on.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions here. So
great.
First one is, does CI vary based on the size of your organization or projects? Like, in other words, what they're asking is, do you see more or less process steps for a very large application versus something that is smaller in size?
Do I see more or less steps for one that's larger or smaller? So yeah, there are a lot of different factors involved in this that factor into implementing continuous integration and implementing test automation with continuous integration. Most of my customers are on the small side. They're usually less than $1 billion in revenue. To me, that's a very large company, but to other people, they call it small. And with the larger companies, there can be more complications. There can be policies and procedures that have been developed over time that were important at one time or another, and that may or may not be helpful now. And working through those policies and procedures and trying to eliminate them when they're in the way of continuous integration can be very difficult. That can be very challenging. The size of the application was a part of the question here. The size of the application can be a challenge. Many times, though, what I find is that most systems are broken down into subsystems, and focusing our area of testing on one particular subsystem can help us to get continuous integration going for that subsystem. So yeah, there are complications with regard to all these things. Sometimes large organizations can implement this easily and quickly, and sometimes it's harder for them. It just kind of, the size of the company is not necessarily the one factor that I would call out in the ease of implementing continuous integration and test automation, but it is one.
Okay. And on the same note, there is another question. If you want to dig into it right now or later, I'll just mention it. So the attendee says, you mentioned Jenkins and Bamboo. Can you give a quick summary of the pros and cons of these two? And if a company is using Jira or planning to use Jira, does one of these work better than the other?
That's a great question. So, you know, I think as technical people, whether we're testers or developers, we tend to get focused on tools a lot. Most of these tools are comparable. Jenkins has been out there a long time. It's open source. It has a large support base for it. Many developers have worked on it over time. There is a lot of material out there to support you in working with it. Bamboo is a proprietary tool from the great people at JetBrains. They also make the IntelliJ IDE. They make terrific products. Some of the verbiage between them is different. I don't particularly have preferences, but I don't really have the luxury of having a preference of one over the other. My clients use all different things, but I'm always happy to help people walk through what works best in their environments. The only reason that I would see Jira as being a concern with regard to which tool you use, whether it's Circle CI or GitHub continuous integration or whatever it is, would be how you're going to integrate with these tools with Jira. But you know, frankly, I think this very quickly leads back to the conversation of whether or not tools are the solution for your problem or they're things we use to solve a problem. And frankly, the process around these things is much more important for the success of projects than the tool itself is.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So another quick question is, what is SCC?
Oh yeah, so source code control. So that's your Git or your TFS or Subversion or whatever. That's your source code control system, right? You may know it as Bitbucket or GitLab or something else.
Mm-hmm. And then there is another question which says, when you say code is merged into the CI system, this means the code has been reviewed and found to be good to be merged, right?
It depends on the organization, and it depends on the processes within the organization. So sometimes there are reviews that go on before merges happen. Sometimes there are not. It just kind of depends on the organization and which way they want to go. And there are pros and cons to each part of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Kathy asks, in your experience, what would you say is the biggest challenge or challenges implementing CI?
That's a good question. You know, so many of these things come back to people. It always comes back to people, and it comes back to who is it that wants this initiative to work and whose support do they have. So to me, one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing is getting to know the teams that I work with and trying to understand their goals and their values and how those work together to how they will either work together or not work together to help them achieve things. So I would say the biggest impediment to implementing continuous integration or test automation or just about anything you want to do in a software development environment is the people, but the people are the ones who are also going to be key in making things work. So when it's successful, the people are the thing that were the key there as well.
That's good for now, Paul. We can move ahead and yeah.
Great. So we talked a little bit about prerequisites. Thank you so much, Smita, for that and for all your questions. I love questions and I love discussing this stuff. So here are
There
a
are
few
others
practices.
trickling in, but we'll
What's
take them
that?
later on. I said there are
Okay, all
others
right.
trickling
So,
in. We'll take them later on. Yeah.
okay, thank you. So here are a few practices that help with continuous integration. So committing code frequently, not committing broken code. This is something that I see again and again. What's funny is I see it more often with test automation engineers than I do with developers, committing code that just doesn't work. And so it's funny to me because test automation engineers, we are testers. That's what we do, we're testers. And if a developer were checking broken code, I'm sure you'd hear about it from a tester, but then when we go and write code ourselves, many times we'll check in broken code. So don't commit broken code, and that means it does what it was intended to do. You've tested it locally. You've made sure that things work, that everything works together there. Fixing broken builds immediately. This is one absolutely huge key in getting the most benefit out of using continuous integration. Teams that fix builds immediately incur a cost, and the cost initially is very high. In other words, when we implement continuous integration, you're going to have builds that break again and again and again. It may take a day of just all broken builds. It may take a week or 2 weeks. But a part of that is the team learning how not to check in broken code. A part of it is the team learning how to ensure that they pass test cases. A part of that is the team learning the process of continuous integration and working through it. So there's a learning activity that goes on there. And even after we get continuous integration with test automation running, we still have a higher cost with regard to maintenance of the test cases than we would have if we didn't do test automation and continuous integration to begin with. So the cost of maintenance on these things is higher than it would have been before, but the benefits that we get outweigh it. And those benefits we talked about earlier, but getting code out more quickly, getting a higher level of code out quickly, getting more features out per time unit, a lot of those things go up. In fact, most of them do with teams that are successful at this. So there are a few practices here that I mentioned. So how do we leverage continuous integration as testers? Here's kind of my idea of what testers do. As testers, we cannot assure quality. And I hear a lot of people talking about this, that I'm a quality assurance engineer. Well, how do you assure quality? I don't believe we can. Many of us can't even define the term quality in a meaningful way. At best, we can identify what a system does in relationship to known intentions and report the difference accurately. We may even be able to identify risk associated with the differences we find. Further, we may identify what were previously unspoken intentions and illuminate them for the organization appropriately. So that's kind of the way that I think about it. I know that other people have more formalized, better worded definitions of testing, and this is derivative of some of theirs. It's not all my thinking, but that's kind of where we come to this with testing. So I'm going to get into a little bit about how we view continuous integration from different roles here. So we have testers and we have developers, and the way that we view continuous integration is different. A tester views continuous integration as having a benefit of telling them the status of the product. A developer, on the other hand, may get the benefit of the status of a change. Their priorities are different. Testers tend to see holistically. They tend to look at the entire product. The developer has different priorities and different reasons for doing things. They're looking at the latest change that they made, and they want to know, did it work? The fulfillment of intentions is where the tester sees importance. A developer sees completion of a well-defined task. That tends to be a priority for them. And there are a lot of others here. I'm not going to read through them all, but these are some of the ones that I listed up when I looked at each group's concerns with relationship to continuous integration. And this isn't for every tester and every developer, but these are generalizations, ones that I see. Now, if you're a tester, you may see this way. You may see green as being good and red as being bad, and that all of the ones the tester is looking at are good concerns, and all of the concerns for developers are bad. A developer may look at this and see this completely differently, in a different way. They may see all of the ones on the right as being good. And there are very good reasons for this. Testers and developers have different reasons for this right now. They can't have the headspace to look at the entire system and the level of depth for the problem they're solving all at the same time. They have to limit the scope of what they're looking at in order to use their brain effectively. So they have to look at small changes. They have to look at the completion of that feature. They can't necessarily look at all of the status of the entire product. Testers, on the other hand, may be able to, because they're not focused on the implementation details of one particular feature or problem within a feature. So I think it's important to see that it is necessarily so. It's necessary that developers and testers have different concerns. That's why we have different jobs in the first place. We have different gifts that we bring to the table, and we use those in these jobs, and we are biased one way or the other because of them. So the next question I had in looking through these was, how does CI help? So which of these things does continuous integration actually help with? Now, we may have had expectations of what continuous integration would help with in the earlier slides. This is identifying which ones are actually helped. So the ones in green here are the ones that I believe are actually helped. I don't believe that continuous integration helps with exploration of the product. I think that that's something that an individual tester does with their creativity, their analysis, their understanding, their intuition of systems and of this particular system. I don't think that an automated test case does exploration. It doesn't find errors. It can find differences. Automated test cases can find differences between the expectations we had when we wrote an automated test case and what the system actually does. And that is very helpful, but it doesn't find errors. It exposes problems. It exposes differences. On the other hand, I don't think that we necessarily know about completion of a task. I think that a human being has to decide whether or not something is completely complete. I don't think the CI necessarily helps us with that. So if we remove those, and I've made them gray here to remove them out of kind of what we're talking about, then how do we kind of qualify the other things that are left? Which ones are most important to continuous integration? Where do we see the biggest benefit? Those are in dark green. The ones where we see the least benefit are in light green. So I've used gradients to indicate that here. Verification of what the product's supposed to do and delivery of the product. Those are all pieces that I think are helped by continuous integration. So I'm going to take a break right here and check in with you, Smita.
Yes, we have a real good audience here sending in more questions. So this one is from Satinder. He says, CI test responsibility is of a dev team or QA team also contribute there.
I'm sorry, can you ask that again?
And they were asking if the testing, like this continuous integration testing, is a responsibility of development team or QA team or both, like who really owns it up or does it, or everybody's part of it?
Gotcha. That's a really great question. So I think it really depends on the organization, and it depends on the skills that are available with each of those teams. So sometimes you have testers with extra bandwidth and the skill set so that they can come in and set up the CI system and get everything running and own the process. In general, continuous integration came about because of developers wanting fast feedback. So to have them not in the loop and ensure and trying to make sure that their needs are satisfied, we would miss a huge part of why we're doing continuous integration to begin with. So developers have to be involved. They have to have some level of responsibility. And we'll get a little bit more into who's responsible for what and how we do that later on. But I like to have everybody involved. Ownership is and responsibility is kind of a challenging term. Who actually runs the continuous integration system and keeps it up? Some organizations have a DevOps person who does that. Some teams have a tester do it. Some teams have a developer do it. Find somebody who's passionate about it and get them involved.
Paul, there are other questions coming in, but a couple of attendees saying they lost your sound on the last slide. Can you like quickly
Okay,
repeat the gist of it?
sure. I'm assuming you can hear me
Yeah.
now, though. So,
Yes.
so the gist on this slide with the different gradients of green, the idea is that basically these ones in dark green are the ones that I think CI helps us the most with. So the status of the product, status of change, verification, and delivery are the things that we get the best out of CI. The ones that are lighter colored green are the ones that we are less are things we are less likely to get out of CI, and the ones in gray are ones that I believe CI doesn't help with.
Mhm. Okay, so here's the next question there. Brad says, I'm doing embedded CI and include test on embedded system for CI process. This test includes uploading new build and running some tests on embedded system. The challenge is trying to keep these tests short for CI process. Is there a rule of thumb on maximum time for test run in CI process? Any thoughts or ideas on CI for embedded systems?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into next, is how we arrange test cases depending on runtime. In general, though, one thing I would say there is many times I've run into situations with clients where they believe that their software has to be on a system, a physical system, and sometimes there are simulators that are available for that kind of thing. Sometimes you have to create a simulator in order to do that. But I think I understand where people want to ensure that things work on hardware, but sometimes we can narrow the scope of what we're trying to test and get a benefit for it. So, so the idea of simulators or emulators is one that can be helpful in those cases, but we'll talk more about runtime here in a minute. That's a good question.
We are good for now then, Paul. We can move on.
Ideally, we'd have all tests running in continuous integration, and we'd have a lot of stuff automated. So I kind of broke down some of the types of test cases that I see clients creating and some of the types of test suites that they create. So this is not necessarily organized in any way here. So it's not necessarily categorized left and right or anything like that, but these are different types of tests. So unit tests, ones that run very fast. Service level tests, they might run a little bit slower. These might be API tests or testing a library that you've created or a certain set of components that work together. E2E test, that stands for end to end. So we're testing from one end of a system test. Functional testing is usually your new features. Regression testing is usually trying to tell you, has something changed that we did not expect to change? Has functionality that has existed in the product changed with this newest release? Smoke tests are usually there to tell us if there's a problem. So they will generally run pretty quickly. They'll generally encompass at a very high level some of the most important, highest risk pieces of the application. In other words, things like, is the application up right now? Are we able to log in? Things like that. Integration tests are those where we're checking whether or not pieces of the application work together or subsystems work together. So those are just a few different ones. What I wanted to do with that, one of the things that we do in the Domino's workshop at STP, and I hope everybody will come to that. I'm based in Raleigh or near Raleigh, North Carolina, and it was a very quick plane ride, an inexpensive plane ride to get up there. I'm really looking forward to it. If you're on the East Coast, there's lots of ways to get there for less if you're trying to be cost conscious. But it's going to be a great conference, and the fact that we're right near Dulles means that transportation is not an issue once you're there, so that's helpful as well. But one of the things that we talk through within the Domino's workshop is the idea of how do we categorize test cases and how do we manage them. And I don't want to give away anything from Domino's because it's going to be a ton of fun. But this is kind of the way that I thought through some of these ideas. What if we plotted the runtime of particular test cases and the risk that they were likely to identify or show us, and let's plot those against each other. So I took a hypothetical company. This is not a real company, but we'll just call them Acme Inc. for lack of a better name. And Acme Inc. had all of the types of tests we saw before, and we plotted them on this chart. And that's what this looks like. So for this particular company, the risk that smoke tests would point out if one were to fail was very high. The risk for functional tests that it would point out was low. The run time for unit tests was very short, the runtime for end-to-end tests was very high. And once I plotted it like this, I realized this really has a lot to do with how we manage our test cases within continuous integration. We don't want to have long-running test cases on every commit. In other words, most of the continuous integration systems out there will allow you to trigger on a commit. So if a developer makes a change and commits it to source code control, then we can automatically run certain tests. Those tests that are tied to a commit need to run fast. We want to get feedback very quick. It needs to run in minutes, usually single-digit minutes. I've had clients who wanted to make sure that that was no slower than 5 minutes. Every company is going to be different on that, but that's something where our developer is our customer. We want to make sure that we keep them happy.
Paul,
Hello?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. We're losing your sound. So can you like repeat the last sentence?
Sure.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
I think we're having some technical issues. So can you just repeat?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for telling me about that. I apologize. I've got a kind of a bad connection here, I guess. But basically, you know, smoke tests might be very fast to run. E2E tests might be slow to run. Functional tests might show us less risk when tests fail. Integration tests might show us more risk when they fail. But my thinking was basically that we've got commits that happen. So we've got a build that's triggered on a commit. A developer makes a change and a build runs, and it runs certain sets of tests. We want that to be fast. So we look for the ones with the lowest runtime. We may have test cases that altogether run in 45 minutes. And in that case, we want to make sure that the time between these particular builds is more than 45 minutes. So we want to look at how long things run. And with this particular company, this Acme, hypothetical Acme company, this is the way we broke it up. Most of these systems will have a commit hook where when a developer does a commit, they can automatically run things. It'll automatically run certain tests. So in this case, on commit, we're running smoke and unit tests. Every hour, we're running integration service and functional tests. And then nightly, maybe these take 5 hours to run or 12 hours to run. Nightly, we're running these E2E, UI, and regression tests. So, you know, the boundaries of these and how often they run is something that each team has to figure out. But you're going to be breaking your test cases up in order to get the most benefit out of your continuous integration system and in order to produce as fast as possible. We want to know the state of the system as best we can at any time, at any point in time. What I don't want to do is wait 12 hours between builds every single time, right? We want our developers to have much faster feedback in seconds. So how are we impacted as testers by continuous integration? Should testers fear CI? I hear a lot of times the friction that I encounter in companies with regard to testers is fear. And fear is something we all have for different reasons, whatever. I am crazy afraid of making cold calls. I'm also afraid of heights. But that doesn't mean that I should never go above the second floor of a building, and it doesn't mean that I should never make a cold call. But you know, with testers, the fears are different. Are we going to lose our jobs? Well, hey, look, your job is what keeps a house, a roof over your head, and food in your kids' bellies. So that's very important. Are we going to lose control? Lose control of how we test things, of whether or not the quality is as high as we want. These are fears that I see again and again. Fear of the unknown, because we've never done it before. We're afraid of it. Well, you know, I wanted to sit down and think through which fears were actually ones that we should be concerned about. What should we do with it? And so here's the experience that I typically see with testers who experience CI and have test automation working and running with continuous integration. We've already got so much to test that we're never going to be able to test it all. That's just the way the world is today, the way software is today. But you're able to test more with continuous integration because you've offloaded the task of running through scripts in rote and handed that off to code to do it. And then we do it very often, so we can always tell the results of those scripts. A lot of testers, when they're experiencing continuous integration, much like when they experience agile development, they realize that they're trying to work toward a moving target. So the code is always changing. How often have you as a tester or your team of testers said, I can't test it until it's stable? Well, we don't get stable anymore. We want to be stable all the time. We don't want to have to wait 2 weeks to get to a stable point with our product. The role of continuous integration, the role of these automated tests, is to ensure that we know the state and that we are stable more often. So we don't have to wait for that anymore. So yes, you will be working on a moving target, but you'll also be stable more of the time. We have quicker assessments of the state of the system, more certainty. Wouldn't you like to sit down in a meeting and have a manager say, okay, what's your confidence level for these tests and for what's been tested? And you could say, my confidence level is 95%, boss. I am happy. I'm really excited about what's going on here. But instead, what we have many times is we don't necessarily know what all has been tested with our teams. We don't know how well it's been tested when we're not doing these activities and these practices. So we get more certainty out of this. We get repeatability. We extend our abilities and reach, clearer, more direct communication. So we have reports that are generated by tools, not ones that we make by hand and guess at percentages of. We can actually see real metrics when we've automated these things. So on the other hand, who are the testers who should avoid continuous integration? Well, if you like to manually run through test executions, this is not for you. If you believe or think that testing should slow down deployments or slow down delivery of software, this is not for you. If you're philosophically opposed to test automation, this is not for you. I don't pretend to know what you need to do in your situation to avoid CI if it's coming down the pipe and it's something that is going to happen in your organization. I don't pretend to know your best choice of action there, but I can identify who the folks are that need to be thinking about what's next in their line of work. So I think the benefits of continuous integration far outweigh the problems. I'm gonna finish up here in just a minute, and then we'll open up for questions with the last 10 minutes of this presentation, I believe, if I remember the agenda correctly. But there are some roles that are added to this. We always have the leaders on the teams, whether they're actual named that as managers or scrum masters or whatever. We always have some leader who's helping move things forward. We have developers and testers. And then there are two new things here. So there's a person who does triage. In other words, they're the person that each morning or throughout the day is going to make sure that test automation is working, that the framework isn't failing us, that we actually have found a real bug with our test automation. They're going to be managing those and helping ensure that the right people jump on and help solve those problems throughout the day. So I think triage is an important part of this. Test automation creator, you've got somebody who's actually creating these tests. And I did a really nice breakdown of this on our last webinar last month on beaufortfairmont.com/webinars about the need for full-time test automation engineers and why we need to make a case for that. So make sure to check that out. That's recorded out there as well. So I just want to check out, did we answer these questions? What is CI? I think we did. How do we leverage CI as testers? I believe we did that as well. Are we impacted by continuous integration? Absolutely, and hopefully the impact is a positive one. Here's some references. Make sure to email me, paul@beaufortfairmont.com, if you want these references or if you just want to chat. I love talking to people about test automation. If you're looking for someone to come in and talk with your team or work with you with test automation, get you going with that, hopefully you feel comfortable, give me a yell, and let's do that together. These are the icons, the folks who were the artists to create the icons, and I give them credit so that I can use their icons here. These are some of my contact pieces of information here. I love talking on Twitter, love emailing with people, so reach out to me. And Smita, that's what I've got. Are there some questions that we can answer as we wrap up here?
Yes, absolutely. We have a couple more coming in, and the first one is from our very own and my personal favorite, Alessandra. She says, "Hi, Paul. If I understood your graph correctly, smoke test was displayed as very high risk. If that is correct, could you please elaborate more why that is the case?"
Hey, Alessandra. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for the question. So once again, this is a hypothetical company. This is a company that's hypothetical, and I'm not saying that smoke tests themselves are high risk. I'm saying that the risk exposed by smoke tests may be high. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit. In your company, you may not have high risk exposed by smoke tests, but then if you have smoke tests and they're not exposing high risk issues, I would ask why that's the case. Why do you have smoke tests at all? That's one of the reasons we have them. So hopefully that answers that question.
She says, got it. Thanks, Paul.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so here's Andrew. He's asking how to avoid situation when on commit and hourly tests may overlap. What he means is during running hourly test, someone commits changes and then triggers smoke test.
Okay, so thanks for the question, Andrew. So I'm not sure what we're avoiding. It sounds like you're trying to avoid the two test suites running at the same time, but I don't know why that would be a problem. I mean, I can certainly see cases where that would be a problem, but I don't know why it's the problem for you. So, so I guess I would say this. I mean, it could be the issue that the deploy is the problem, right? So let's say that we have a long-running hourly functional test suite that takes 45 minutes to run, and then when smoke runs, it deploys to that system, which crashes all the functional tests. If you've got a problem like that, I would suggest either isolating environments where they run, or not having smoke tests that depend on your system under test in the smoke test, and just move them all over to functional or something along those lines. So dividing up environments can be one way to do that. Dividing up your tests in ways that impact you less would be one part of that. If it's because you can't run your smoke test and your functional tests at the same time, so one of the main problems with test cases that can't run at the same time is they generally have contention on data in the system. For instance, one test needs to use a password to get into the system, but another test case is changing that password at the very same time. So the one that's trying to log in can't log in because of the other one. So we're contending on the data, and that piece of data is the password that that particular user uses. If that's the case, if that's the contention you're working through, then make sure to look at the test data management webinar on my site, and there's another one which is demo with data strategies or something along those lines, or just shoot me an email and we'll talk.
Yeah, that will be a good follow-up. So Srinivas asks, how does load and performance testing fits into CI?
Hey Srini, thanks for the question. Let's see, so how do they fit into CI? Well, there are some companies certainly that try to do load testing and performance testing with CI, focus around functional testing and regression testing and automating the process of getting appropriate information from systems with that. So I'm not sure I'm able to answer that question. In general, what I see is that performance testing and load testing is something that takes a human being. It's not, I mean, you could run it all the time, but I don't necessarily know if that's helpful in most situations. So yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know.
Maybe that's also probably because the analysis part of it is really involves the expert level understanding and probably the performance test experts. So even if you run the test, it's like you can't really come to a conclusion without manually intervening.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, my experience with performance testing and load testing, and with talking with folks like Mark Tomlinson, that's going to be at STP, is that that process is basically a series of experiments. It's basically a learning activity where we have to, those individuals have to learn from the people involved. They have to understand the architecture of the systems. They're trying to not only show issues, but explore what those issues are and drill down into them. And just running scripts again and again doesn't necessarily tell you that. Now, it might tell you if you have created a problem with performance or load, but it doesn't necessarily do what performance testing in general and load testing in general, in my experience, is supposed to do.
Right. So here is a follow-up question, Paul, from Kathy on Andrew's question. She says, as you have defined the on-commit, hourly, and nightly tests, are those deployed and executed in different environments, or are they within the same environment?
Hey, that's a really good question. That's great. So the other part of this is that deployment doesn't necessarily have to be tied to running the test cases. So, and I guess I should hesitate to say that. I guess in most cases it should be tied. So like if we're doing an hourly build, then we probably want to deploy to that system. on the hour, and then after that hour, run the test cases. A lot of companies will have different environments for this. A lot of clients will turn off hourly at night because there's not really that much need for it. Nobody's working at night. We're trying to get fast feedback for individuals. Some folks will have that nightly build also do all of the other tests on here so that you get a full, clear perspective of what's going on after each night. So there are a lot of ways to approach that. I hope I answered your question, Kathy.
I really like her questions. The last one here for you today, Paul, is from Reginald. He says, what CI applications do you recommend?
Hey, Reginald. So what CI applications? I'm guessing you're asking about the actual tools, and I'm not gonna call one out over the other. I mean, the ones that I've used that I like are Bamboo and Jenkins. Back in the day, I liked Hudson before Jenkins was around. There were a lot of ones that I've liked in the past. I have not gotten the chance to use Circle CI. You know, CloudBees has an entire cloud infrastructure and cloud option for doing Jenkins builds. Bamboo is terrific because the folks at JetBrains are just so smart. I haven't yet used the GitHub continuous integration tool. So I wish I could answer your question. I wish I could say these are my favorites, but I just can't. I'm kind of tool agnostic in a lot of ways. I like to help teams find the tool that's right for them, and in order to do that, I need a lot more information.
I think that's very appropriate response, Paul. As you were responding to him, we have another question here from Satinder. He says, for software development, we use Maven as build tool. Is it possible to trigger Jenkins jobs via build command so that we can utilize existing test suite as CI?
Yeah. Yes. So lots of people use Maven to build their code and then trigger the test to run right after that. If you have existing automated test cases, really all you need, most of these products will allow you to run things from the command line. And so while that may not be your preferred method, some people like command line stuff and some people don't, it is the way to get past problem. It's the one that can help you the most in some of these situations. Plenty of these products have plugins for your specific tools. So there are plugins within Jenkins for Maven. In fact, I think it might be built into the actual product. There are plugins for different kinds of test runners, like JUnit runners and TestNG and MS Build, and a lot of these things have built in. A lot of these system CI applications will have those built in or with free plugins to go along with them. So, so yeah, I hope that answers your question.
So that's all for now. Okay. Kathy does send in, yes, Satinder says thanks, but Kathy is sending in one last one. So maybe I'll take this as the absolute last one. And anyone that sends in questions after this, we will send them to you and you can kind of answer them and we'll post them on the site for them to refer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Let's hear it. Thanks, Kathy.
So
let's hear it. What's she say?
In your experience, have companies standardized on one set of tools? Or are they varied based on applications? I think you did answer, but yeah, go ahead.
So I guess I'd have to ask a little bit more about what that means. In general, there are, so the approach that I see most people taking with regard to test automation and development in general is that they want to take one tool suite, one technical stack, and use it all across all of their teams. And that makes a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons. It makes sense contractually that you have less contracts to deal with. That lowers your costs with regard to negotiation and price and all that kind of thing. There are things like support. If you can get support for one team or two teams or four teams at the same time, generally you can get a discount. And if a tool has that, that's helpful. It's just, I don't really know what tools you're talking about. One of the things that I will say is that many times the companies that I work with, and once again, these are smaller companies, less than about $1 billion in revenue, but most of the time they'll have one CI system running for everyone. In other words, everybody uses Bamboo across teams, right? But some of them may use Selenium for UI testing, and then another one may use Protractor, and that might have something to do with the fact that the first team has used some type of tooling in their application that's different than the second team, and maybe the second team uses Angular and Protractor works really well with that. So in terms of the tools that people use for test automation and CI, I like to be pragmatic. I like to figure out what it is we're intending to do with this, and then I like to see each team succeed. And the tools that we use can help define our success. So let's use the right tools for the right problems. And in general, I don't like saying, hey, everybody use Selenium because that's what we use. Well, to me, that's not a good reason, and it doesn't help us all be successful. So I like to see people use the tools that are right at the right point in time.
Yeah, I think Kathy says you answered it, so thank you. All right. So, Paul, thanks for your time today. It was a very insightful session on. Go ahead.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, STP. I hope to see everybody in DC, and if I don't, pull out your phone and take a shot at my contact information right here and get in touch with me. Okay, I like meeting people and I like getting to know folks.
Absolutely. So it was a very insightful session on continuous integration testing and kind of role of testers there. Loved the audience questions and engagement. Lovely audience. So thank you there too. I'm sure all of our attendees found it very informative and useful too. So thanks again, and I hope to see you all in Washington. So well, everyone, this concludes our webinar for today. Thanks everyone for joining in. And more importantly, thank you for being so engaging and making the most of the webinar for yourself and for the whole group. Stay tuned for more webinars and online trainings coming soon. And if you haven't signed up yet for the upcoming webinar, which is Enhanced Customer Experience by Proactive Performance Testing by Arun Datta on 23rd of August. The link is up for registration at SoftwareTestPro.com. So go ahead. Thanks everyone. Have a great week ahead. See you all in Washington.